Nobody at Harmon County Municipal Airport knew what Erin Doyle used to fly. They knew what she flew now, a battered yellow air tractor, engine coughing awake before sunrise, 6 days a week, spraying soybeans until the heat got too thick to breathe. She kept to herself. She ate lunch alone on the tailgate of her truck. When people asked about the thin white scar along her jaw, she said farm accident, and let the conversation die there. She wasn't lying, exactly. She just wasn't telling the whole truth. The tower crew called her the Duster Lady, sometimes ma'am, when they remembered. Nathan Griffin, 26 years old, and 4 months into the job, called her nothing at all. He'd barely looked up from his scope the whole season. To him, she was a blip on final, cleared, gone, forgotten. He had no idea that 6 years ago, on a night nobody in this county would ever hear about, her hands had been the last steady thing standing between a burning airframe and 41 people. He was about to find out. That's the setup. Now let's get into it. Again, comment where you're tuning in from, subscribe if you haven't yet, and like the video if you're already hooked. Let's go. By 9, the heat was already pressing down on the runway, invisible waves. Erin taxied the air tractor back to the hangar, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the ringing silence the way she always did, the way you do when your ears expect radio traffic that isn't coming anymore. She popped the canopy, climbed down, and reached for the hose to rinse chemical residue off the wings. That was when the scanner on her workbench crackled to life. She almost didn't listen, almost, but something in the pitch of the voice on the radio, thin, too fast, breathing wrong, made her stop with the hose still running. Harmon Tower, this is Redline 62. We've lost primary flight control authority. Repeat, loss of control authority. Requesting immediate vectors. Nathan Griffin's voice answered, clipped and higher than usual. Redline 62, Harmon Tower, say souls on board and fuel remaining. 41 souls, fuels. Fuel's not the problem, sir. It's the stick. It's not responding right. We're getting oscillation. Erin's hand tightened on the hose without her noticing. 41 souls. A regional jet, inbound, somewhere over the grain elevators east of town, fighting a control system that wasn't listening to its pilots anymore. She'd felt that exact wrongness before. The stick going soft and strange under her palm, the airframe answering half a second late, like it was thinking it over first. She turned the hose off. In the tower, Nathan Griffin's hands were sweating on the mic. He'd run maybe a dozen real emergencies in training. None of them had felt like this. The disembodied voice of Redline 62's first officer coming apart in real time. 41 lives strapped into a fuselage that wouldn't answer its own controls. Redline 62, say your altitude and heading. 6,000. Descending. We can't hold it, sir. The aircraft's porpoising. We can't. Frank Sullivan, the tower chief, came through the door at a near run, coffee forgotten somewhere behind him. 22 years on this job had given him a face that didn't panic anymore, but his eyes were doing the math same as everyone else's. Regional jet, flight control malfunction, no visual, no clean airport for 80 miles that could take an aircraft coming in like that. Get approach on the line, Frank said. And radar, I want eyes on that thing now. Nathan's fingers fumbled the frequency switch. Outside the tower glass, heat shimmer rippled off the runway, empty and waiting. Unaware that somewhere above the grain elevators, a metal tube full of people was fighting to stay level in the sky. Nobody in that tower cab had flown a fixed-wing emergency landing without functioning primary controls. Nobody in that tower cab had ever needed to. That was about to change, because 40 feet from the hangar, a woman in chemical-stained coveralls was already running toward her truck. Erin didn't remember deciding to run. 1 second she was standing by the hangar, hose forgotten on the concrete, and the next she was hauling open her truck door, chemical-stained coveralls and all, throwing it into gear before the door had even shut all the way. The tower sat a quarter-mile down the access road. She covered it faster than she'd covered anything in 6 years. She didn't knock. She didn't wait to be buzzed in. She took the stairs 2 at a time, lungs burning in a way they hadn't in a long time, and shoved through the door into the cab just as Nathan Griffin was repeating, voice cracking. Redline 62, say again, we're We're not reading you clearly. Frank Sullivan turned first. Ma'am, you can't be in. What's the malfunction? Aaron said. Not a question. Flat, clipped, already moving toward the radar display, like she'd stood at that console 1,000 times before. Nathan stared at her. Coveralls, grease on her hands, a scanner clipped to her belt like some retired hobbyist who chased sirens for fun. This is a restricted area. We've got an active emergency. You need to. I know you do, Aaron said. That's why I'm here. What's the malfunction? Something in her voice made Frank Sullivan hesitate. Just half a second, just long enough to notice that this woman wasn't asking permission. Ma'am, I need you to step outside, Nathan said, sharper now, embarrassment creeping under the authority in his voice. This is an active aircraft emergency. You can't just. Loss of control authority, Frank cut in, watching her instead of his controller. First officers calling it oscillation. Aircrafts porpoising on approach vector, they can't hold altitude. Aaron's eyes flicked to the radar return blinking east of the field, then to the altitude readout ticking down in uneven jumps. 5,800. 5,600. Not a clean descent. A fight. Flight control computers not translating stick input, she said, half to herself. Or it's translating it wrong. Feels delayed, feels soft, then overcorrects. Nathan froze mid-sentence. How would you get me on that frequency? Aaron said, already reaching for the spare headset hanging by the console. Absolutely not, Nathan said. You're not certified. You're not cleared. I don't even know who you. Nathan. Frank's voice was quiet. He was looking at her hands, steady, completely steady, resting on the console like they belonged there. 41 souls on a jet with no time left for procedure. Let her talk. Nathan didn't move. Aaron didn't wait for him to. She lifted the spare headset off its hook herself, seated it over her ears in one practiced motion, and thumbed the transmit switch like she'd never stopped. Redline 6-2. This is Harmon Advisory. Go ahead. Static. Then the first officer's voice, ragged, disbelieving that anyone new was suddenly on frequency. Who is this? We need tower. We need. I hear you're fighting oscillation on the elevator input, Aaron said, and her voice had changed, flattened out, gone level, and unhurried in a way that made the hair stand up on the back of Frank Sullivan's neck. Confirm. Are you seeing a delay between stick input and control surface response, then an overcorrection? A pause, then stunned. Yes. Yes, exactly that. How do you. Copy. Don't fight it with big inputs. You'll feed the oscillation. Small corrections. Hold them. Let the aircraft settle between each one. Talk to me about your trim. Nathan Griffin stood frozen by his own console, staring at a woman in chemical-stained coveralls calmly walking a stranger through a partial control failure like she was reading off a grocery list. Frank Sullivan reached for the phone to call approach, and stopped, hand hovering, because something about the calm in her voice told him this call might not need backup after all. Outside, 41 people were still falling out of a clean blue sky, and the only person in the county who seemed unbothered by that fact was the crop duster pilot nobody had bothered to learn the real name of. The first officer's voice came back thinner. Trim's fighting me too. It keeps resetting on its own. I can't hold a stable setting. Copy that. Aaron's eyes tracked the altitude readout without blinking. 5,100. Descending in shallow, ragged steps, like the aircraft itself couldn't decide how badly it wanted to fall. Who's flying? You or the captain? Captain's flying. I'm working the radios and the checklist. We've run the QRH twice. Nothing's. Tell your captain his instinct is right to fight small, Aaron said. Tell him to stop trusting the trim wheel. Fly it off raw stick feel and the horizon. Ignore what the trim indicator's telling him. It's lying. A beat of silence, then quieter. How do you know that? Aaron didn't answer right away. Frank Sullivan was watching her now, instead of the radar, arms crossed, something working behind his eyes. Nathan had gone very still by the far window, headset forgotten around his neck, staring at the woman who'd walked in off a tarmac like she owned the frequency. Because I've flown it before, Aaron said finally, and keyed off before anyone could ask what it meant. Frank Sullivan had run this tower for 22 years, and in 22 years he'd learned to recognize the sound of someone who'd actually been inside an emergency versus someone who'd only studied one. This woman wasn't reciting a manual. She was remembering. "Ma'am," he said, low, so it wouldn't carry over her open mic. "I need a name for the log." Erin didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the radar blip, tracking its uneven crawl toward the field. Later. "Redline 62's requesting a runway assignment," Nathan said, voice tight, finally back at his own console, professional instinct overriding his confusion. "They want the longest strip we've got." "They're not going to get a normal approach," Erin said. "Not with that trim behavior. Tell your chief to clear the whole field. No other traffic. Full emergency response staged at midfield, not the threshold. If this goes the way I think it's going, they're going to touch down harder and longer than anyone's briefed them for." Frank was already reaching for the crash phone before she finished the sentence. Nathan stared at her. "How do you know how it's going to land?" Erin's jaw tightened, just slightly. The first crack in the stillness she'd carried since she walked through that door. "Because I've done this landing before. In something worse." The crash trucks were rolling into position at midfield when the jet finally broke visible through the haze. A smear of white against blue, wings rocking in small, deliberate corrections that Erin recognized instantly, because she'd taught herself that exact rhythm once, a lifetime ago, over water instead of wheat fields. "Redline 62, Harmon advisory, you're in sight, 6 miles out," she transmitted. "You're doing it right. Small inputs. Keep the horizon level, don't chase the numbers." "Copy." The captain's voice came through now, rougher than the first officer's, older, steadier despite everything. "Whoever you are, thank you." Frank Sullivan set down the crash phone and looked at her fully for the first time since she'd walked in. Really looked, past the coveralls and the grease and the scanner clipped to her belt, at the way she stood braced and unbothered in front of a console that wasn't hers, talking a stranger through a landing that would have had most pilots in the county reaching for a prayer instead of a checklist. "I need that name now," he said. "For the record, before this airplane's on the ground." Erin's thumb hovered over the transmit switch. Behind her, Nathan Griffin had gone very quiet, watching her the way you watch someone you've badly misjudged. She didn't answer Frank directly. Instead, she keyed the mic one more time, voice flat and sure. "Redline 62, Copperhead's got you. Just fly the horizon." The cab went silent. Frank Sullivan's hand stopped halfway to the logbook. Because he'd heard that call sign before, in a briefing room, 11 years ago, in a file he wasn't supposed to remember the details of anymore. Copperhead. Frank said it out loud, like testing whether the word would still make sense once it left his mouth. Erin didn't turn around. Her eyes were still on the jet, still tracking its uneven, corrected wobble toward the runway threshold. "You knew that name," she said. "Not a question." "I filed a report with that name in it," Frank said slowly. 11 years ago, before I ever set foot in this tower. Training command, out of Pensacola. There was a rescue op, a downed helicopter crew, whether nobody should have flown in. The report said the pilot who brought that Harrier back with half her hydraulics gone requested her name be kept off the official record. He paused. Said the call sign was the only thing anyone was allowed to remember. Nathan Griffin's mouth opened and shut without sound. "Harrier?" he finally managed. "You flew a—" "I flew a lot of things," Erin said quietly, still watching the horizon. "None of it's on a form anymore. Doesn't matter right now. That jet's 4 miles out and still fighting trim it can't trust." She keyed the mic again before either man could ask another question. "Redline 62, Copperhead, gear down, flaps as briefed, and stop trusting your trim wheel completely. Fly it raw the last 2 miles. You've got this." 4 miles became 3. 3 became 1.5. The jet dropped through the last stretch of hazy air in a series of small, disciplined corrections, wings rocking but never past the point of no return, because somewhere in that cockpit, a captain who had never met her was doing exactly what a stranger's voice told him to do, and trusting it completely. "Sync rate's high," Erin said, calm, watching the numbers Frank read off beside her. "That's fine. That's expected with the trim behaving like that. Don't try to soften it at the last second. You'll balloon and lose the runway." Take the hard touchdown. Your gear's built for it. Copy. Taking it hard, the captain said, voice tight but no longer ragged. Just focused now. Just flying. Nathan had stopped watching the radar entirely. He was watching her, the woman he'd nearly thrown out of the tower 20 minutes ago, standing dead still with a headset clamped over grease-streaked hair, giving instructions with the specific, unhurried certainty of someone who'd said these exact words before, to someone else, somewhere he couldn't picture, and wasn't sure he was allowed to ask about. Runway in sight, the captain said. 60 seconds. Aaron's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on the console edge, the only sign, in 20 minutes, that any of this had cost her anything at all. 30 seconds, Aaron said. Gears down, you're configured, you're doing everything right. I want you flying the numbers, not the feel. Ignore anything that feels wrong in the yoke. The numbers are true, the feel isn't. Silence on the other end. Then, copy Copperhead. Flying the numbers. The jet crossed the threshold low and fast, wings level for one held breath, then dropping, hard, exactly as she'd warned, gear slamming into the runway, with a bang that carried all the way up to the tower glass. For a heartbeat it looked like too much, like the aircraft might come apart under its own violence. Then the nose stayed down, reverse thrust roared, spoilers deployed. The jet shuddered, groaned, and held the center line, ugly, hard, and exactly survivable. Nobody in the tower cab breathed until it rolled to a stop with 400 feet of runway to spare. Frank Sullivan let out a breath that sounded like it had been building for 20 minutes. Nathan Griffin sat down hard in his chair, hands shaking now that there was nothing left to hold steady for. And Aaron Doyle, Copperhead, whoever that had been 11 years ago, simply set the headset down on the console, quiet and unhurried, like she'd just finished a routine crop run, instead of talking 41 strangers out of the sky. For a moment, nobody in the tower cab said anything at all. The jet sat motionless on the runway, ringed by crash trucks that had arrived and now had nothing to do but idle, lights still spinning uselessly over a landing that hadn't needed them. Nathan Griffin was the first to find his voice, and when he did, it came out smaller than he meant it to. You flew Harriers. A long time ago, Aaron said. 11 years isn't that long, Frank said, still holding the logbook he'd never actually written in. Copperhead, that was you, the Pensacola file. Aaron didn't confirm it out loud. She didn't have to. The silence did that for her, stretching a beat too long to be anything but true. She reached up and unhooked the scanner from her belt, turning it over once in her hands like she was deciding whether to say more. There was a rescue, she said finally. Downed crew, bad weather, a jet that shouldn't have been flying and definitely shouldn't have made it back. I did what needed doing. Then I got out. She set the scanner down on the console, gently, like it weighed more than it looked. That's the whole story. Nothing dramatic. Nathan looked at her like that was the least believable sentence he'd heard all day. Frank finally set the logbook down without opening it. That's not nothing, ma'am. That's a commendation file I read as a rookie controller, because somebody wanted new hires to understand what off-nominal actually meant. They redacted your name. They didn't redact what you did. They redacted it because I asked them to, Aaron said quietly. Why? She was quiet long enough that Nathan thought she wasn't going to answer. When she did, her voice had lost some of its flatness, just a little, just enough to notice. Because after that night, I didn't want to be Copperhead anymore. I wanted to be nobody in particular, somebody who flies low and slow, and doesn't have 41 lives riding on whether her hands stay steady. She glanced toward the window, toward the jet still sitting on the runway, while ground crews approached it with stares. Didn't work out exactly the way I planned, I guess. Down on the tarmac, the aircraft door was cracking open. The first passengers were beginning to emerge, unsteady, blinking in the sunlight, alive. Nathan watched them for a moment, then looked back at her. Really looked. The way you look at someone after you've been completely wrong about who they were. I told you to get out of my tower. You did, Aaron said, and for the first time all day, something almost like a smile touched the corner of her mouth. You were doing your job. Frank Sullivan picked up the crash phone one more time, this time to call off nothing more urgent than a debrief. When he set it down, He turned to Aaron with an expression she recognized, the specific, careful respect of someone recalibrating everything they thought they understood about a person. "I've got to file a report," he said. "On today. I need your full name for it." "Real one this time." Aaron considered that for a moment, watching the last of the passengers make their way down the stairs onto solid ground, some of them dropping to their knees right there on the tarmac. "Aaron Doyle," she said finally. "Captain, United States Marine Corps, retired." Nathan Griffin, 26 years old and 4 months into the job, sat back slowly in his chair, like the weight of the last 20 minutes had only just caught up to him. "You outrank me by about 100 lifetimes." "I outrank you by nothing," Aaron said. "I'm a civilian now, same as you." But Frank was already reaching for the radio to call the field's operations office, and something in his voice, when he spoke next, carried a different weight than it had all morning. "Not today, you're not." Outside, the captain of Redline 62 was climbing down the stairs onto the tarmac, scanning the tower windows like he was looking for someone he owed a debt to and didn't know how to name. By the time Aaron made it down to the tarmac, the captain of Redline 62 was already walking toward her, cutting straight through a knot of ground crew and paramedics like nothing else in the world mattered more than reaching her first. He was maybe 50, silver at the temples, tie loosened, hands still faintly trembling in a way he didn't try to hide. Up close, he looked like a man who'd aged 5 years in the last 20 minutes. "Copperhead," he said, stopping a few feet from her. That's really what I'm supposed to call you?" "Aaron's fine." He shook his head slowly, like the name wasn't the point and they both knew it. "I've been flying commercial for 18 years. I have never, not once, had a control malfunction like that. My first officer's hands were shaking so bad he could barely work the checklist, and you talked us down like you were reading us a bedtime story." He exhaled, long and unsteady. How does someone learn to sound like that? Aaron looked past him, toward the aircraft, toward the passengers being walked in loose, stunned lines toward the terminal. "You don't learn to sound calm," she said. "You learn to be calm, and the sound just follows. Took me a long time to get there. Don't recommend the method I used." The captain's throat worked once before he spoke again. Whatever that method was, 41 people are walking around right now because of it. The captain extended his hand and Aaron shook it. A brief, firm grip, nothing dramatic, though his eyes stayed on her face a beat longer than a handshake usually calls for, like he was trying to memorize something he was afraid he'd otherwise forget. "Redline's going to want to talk to you," he said. "NTSB's going to want to talk to you. Probably the news too, once this gets out." "It's not getting out," Aaron said, and something in her voice closed the subject as firmly as a door. "I didn't do this for a headline. I did it because I was standing close enough to help, and nobody else in that tower had flown a partial flight control failure before. That's the whole story." "That's not the whole story," the captain said quietly, "but I understand wanting it to be." Behind them, paramedics were loading a passenger onto a stretcher. Not for the crash, Aaron realized, watching the medic's easy, unhurried movements, but for a panic attack, the ordinary human aftermath of surviving something that should have killed them. She watched the stretcher go by and felt something in her chest that she didn't examine too closely. Nathan Griffin was jogging across the tarmac toward them now, headset still looped around his neck, breathless in a different way than he'd been in the tower. "Ma'am," he called out. "Aaron, Copperhead, whatever I'm supposed to call you." He stopped in front of her, and for the first time all day, he looked like exactly what he was, a kid barely out of training, standing in front of someone who'd quietly rewritten his whole understanding of who deserved respect and who didn't. "I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything," Aaron said, but Nathan shook his head before she could finish. "I told you to leave. I told a decorated Marine Corps pilot to get out of my tower because she was wearing coveralls and had grease under her nails." His voice cracked slightly on the word decorated, like he still couldn't quite fit the word around the woman standing in front of him. "I've spent 6 months thinking I knew how to spot who mattered in an emergency. Today I found out I don't know anything." "You knew your job," Aaron said. "You were protecting a restricted space during an active emergency." "That's not a mistake, Nathan. That's exactly what you're trained to do." She paused, studying him for a moment. the flush still high in his cheeks, the shame he hadn't figured out how to put down yet. The mistake would have been not listening once Frank told you to. You listened. That's the part that matters. He didn't look entirely convinced, but he nodded anyway, the way you nod when you're not ready to argue with someone who just saved 41 lives in front of you. Frank Sullivan was coming across the tarmac now too, phone still in hand, his expression somewhere between exhaustion and something closer to pride. Ops wants a full statement. NTSB's sending someone out from the regional office, and... He hesitated, glancing at Aaron with something almost apologetic. There's already a local news van at the gate. Aaron's jaw tightened, the scar along it catching the light for just a moment. Of course there is. Aaron didn't go near the news van. She didn't need to. The story would tell itself soon enough, in whatever shape the county wanted to give it, and there was nothing she could do about that now, except decide how much of herself she let the cameras have. I'll give Ops my statement, she said. I'll talk to NTSB if they need me. I'm not talking to a camera. Frank nodded like he'd expected that answer, and respected it more for not having to negotiate it. Understood. I'll handle the rest. She turned to walk back toward the hangar, back toward the truck she'd abandoned with the door half open an hour ago, and found the captain of Redline 62 falling into step beside her, unwilling to let the moment end without something more than a handshake. For what it's worth, he said, in 18 years of flying, I've met maybe 3 people who could have done what you did today. Talked a stranger through that kind of failure, without a single wasted word, without once sounding like you doubted it would work. He shook his head slowly. You said you don't recommend the method you used to learn that kind of calm. I believe you, but I'm glad you learned it. Aaron kept walking, eyes fixed on the hangar ahead, the yellow tail of her air tractor just visible in the shade. So am I, she said quietly. Most days. Behind them, the first officer, young, pale, hands finally steady again, was standing near the aircraft stairs, staring after her, like he was trying to fix the moment in his memory, before it slipped away entirely. She reached the hangar just as the adrenaline finally started to drain out of her legs, leaving them heavier than she expected. She sat down on the same truck tailgate she always ate lunch on, alone, and let herself breathe for the first time since the scanner had crackled to life. Her hands were steady. They'd been steady the entire time, through the radio calls, through the landing, through the walk across the tarmac. It was only now, sitting still with nothing left to do, that the smallest tremor finally found its way into her fingers. She looked down at them like they belonged to someone else. Footsteps crossed the concrete behind her. She didn't turn around. She recognized the rhythm of Frank Sullivan's walk by now, unhurried, deliberate, a man who'd learned a long time ago that most conversations went better slow. NTSB's going to want the full technical breakdown, he said, stopping a respectful few feet away. The oscillation, the trim behavior, all of it. You gave that jet's crew instructions nobody in that cockpit had ever heard before, and it worked exactly like you said it would. They're going to want to know how you knew. Because I flew something that did the exact same thing to me once, Aaron said, still looking at her hands. Different airframe, same failure mode, near enough. I didn't get a stranger's voice on the radio walking me through it. I had to figure it out with the ground coming up fast and nobody to ask. Frank was quiet for a moment. And you walked away from that one too? Barely, Aaron said. That's usually how it goes. Frank sat down on the tailgate beside her. Not too close, just close enough to make clear he wasn't leaving yet. For a while, neither of them said anything. Out past the hangar, the crashed trucks were finally rolling back toward their bay. Lights off now, the emergency officially, administratively over. You know, Frank said eventually, I've read a lot of commendation files in this job. Most of them read like fiction. Yours was the only one I ever read that made me put the folder down and just sit there for a minute. Aaron almost smiled. It reads better than it felt. I doubt that. He glanced sideways at her. You've been flying dusters here, what, 3 years? Almost 4. Nobody knew. Nobody needed to, Aaron said. I wasn't hiding some big secret plan. I just wanted a version of flying that didn't come with anyone's life attached to whether I got it right. She looked out at the runway, empty now, heat still rippling faintly off the asphalt in the early afternoon sun. Funny how that worked out today. Frank stood, brushing off his slacks, and extended a hand down to her. Not to help her up, she didn't need that, but as something closer to a formal gesture, one professional to another. For what it's worth, Captain Doyle, this county owes you more than it's ever going to know how to say. Aaron shook his hand, brief and firm, the same way she'd shaken the airline captain's an hour before. Aaron's fine, she said again. I've still got 40 acres to spray before the wind picks up. She was back at the air tractor within the hour. Chemical tanks refilled, checklist running through her hands on autopilot, while half the county, it seemed, had already started talking about what happened at the tower. Word traveled fast in a place this size. By the time she finished her pre-flight, 3 separate hangar hands had wandered by just to look at her, like she might have changed shape sometime in the last 90 minutes. She hadn't. She was still the duster lady. She still smelled like fuel and pesticide instead of jet exhaust. Her hands still had the same permanent grease stains they'd had that morning. But something in the way people looked at her now was different, and she suspected it would stay different for longer than she wanted. Nathan Griffin found her just before she climbed into the cockpit, still in his uniform shirt, headset finally set aside somewhere back in the tower. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, hands in his pockets, working up to something. I looked up the Pensacola incident, he finally said. What's declassified of it anyway? There's not much. Just enough to confirm the parts you already told us. He paused. Enough to know you undersold it by a lot. Most people do, Aaron said, checking the fuel gauge. Story's usually smaller once you're the one living it. Can I ask you something? Nathan said. Aaron paused, one hand on the canopy frame. You can ask. Why crop dusting? Out of everything you could have done, instructor, airline, contractor work, all of it pays better, and none of it means climbing into a 40-year-old plane and spraying soybeans at dawn. He shook his head slightly, like the question had been sitting in him since the moment she walked into the tower. You could fly anything. Aaron looked past him, out at the field, at the long rows of green, stretching toward the horizon, in perfectly straight lines she'd cut herself morning after morning, for almost 4 years. I can fly anything, she agreed. Doesn't mean I want the kind of flying that comes with somebody's life depending on whether I get it exactly right. I did that. I was good at it. It cost me things I'm not going to list for you on a tarmac. She climbed up into the cockpit, settling into the familiar worn seat. Out here, if I make a mistake, I ruin a field. Nobody dies. That's the whole appeal. Nathan considered that for a long moment. Today, somebody's life depended on whether you got it exactly right. Yeah, Aaron said, reaching for the ignition. And that's exactly why I don't do it anymore. Except, apparently, when the sky decides otherwise. The engine turned over with its familiar cough, and for a moment, the conversation was swallowed by noise and vibration, the ordinary business of an aircraft waking up. Nathan stepped back, out of the prop wash, one hand raised. Not quite a wave, not quite a salute. Something caught between the two that he didn't seem fully sure how to finish. Aaron noticed it anyway. She lifted 2 fingers off the throttle in something that was almost, but not quite, a salute back. She taxied out toward the strip she used every morning, the same strip she'd used for 4 quiet years, past the tower where Frank Sullivan stood at the window watching her go, past the spot on the tarmac where a regional jet still sat cooling under a tented inspection canopy, its passengers already scattered back into their ordinary lives, the way people do after surviving something they'll spend years trying to explain to people who weren't there. She lined up on the runway, ran her checklist, same as always, throttled up. And for 400 acres and the next 6 hours, Aaron Doyle was nobody in particular again, just the duster lady, cutting straight lines across a green field under a sky that, for one morning, had needed her to be somebody else entirely. By evening, the story was already spreading past the county line, a garbled version at first, then a clearer one, then eventually the truth, more or less, once someone at the airport found the courage to say the words, Marine Corps, and classified rescue, out loud to a reporter who wouldn't let it go. Aaron never gave that interview. She didn't need to. The 41 people who walked off Red Line 6-2 that afternoon told the story better than she ever could have, each in their own way, to their own families, for years afterward. Frank Sullivan kept a framed printout of the radar track from that day, tucked in a drawer instead of on a wall, because some things you don't need to display to remember. Nathan Griffin finished his first year in the tower with a different understanding of who deserves the benefit of the doubt, and he never again let a uniform, or the lack of one, tell him who someone was. And every morning, just past sunrise, the yellow air tractor still lifts off Harmon County's cracked little runway, cutting straight lines across green fields, flown by a woman most people still just call the Duster Lady, because she asked them to, and because some heroes would rather be forgotten than celebrated, as long as the people who needed them made it home. If this story hit home, hit that like button and drop a comment telling us, would you have trusted a stranger's voice on the radio the way that Captain did? And if you haven't already, subscribe for more unforgettable military and aviation stories.